Welcome to Chapter 5, Section 6, entitled Find Rational Zeros. So, first off, there's a rational zero theorem. And what this does is it gives all possible zeros. Every rational zero of f comes from the following term. And this is part of where Waddell's method maybe comes from. Factor of the constant term divided by the factor of the leading coefficient. So the constant term is the a sub 0, or the plane number. The factor of the leading coefficient for here is a sub n, or it's also the coefficient of the degree term. Right? And what this does is it tells us all of the maybe zeros. And so if you look at guided practice number 1, you'll see that f of x equals x cubed, 9x plus 9x squared, plus 23x plus 15. All right. And so what you do is you look at factors of the constant term and a sub n. Which is leading coefficient, which is 1. So basically, what you've got going on here is you have that 15 is 1, 3, 5, and 15. Those are all of the factors of the constant term. You then also have the factors of 1, which just happen to be 1. And one thing you're all going to want to make sure you remember is that factors could be positive or negative. These are the possible zeros. So look at guided practice number 2. You've got 2x cubed plus 3x squared minus 11x minus 6. So the way this is set up, you take, again, the constant term, the leading coefficient. So now 6 is 1, 2, 3, 6. But you're going to end up having to do it a couple times, because 2 is 1, 2, which means 1, 1, 1, 1. That's a possibility. Or 2, 2, 2, 2. Those are all possibilities. And again, do not forget that it could be plus or minus for all of these. Also, just as a reference here, sometimes they repeat. Like this is equal to 1, and so is 2 over 2. So you don't have to necessarily write it twice. 3 over 1 is the same as 6 over 2. So these are all the possible zeros. And it's going to help you later on. So let's take a look here at finding all real zeros of this equation. So let's see, list the possible rational zeros. The leading coefficient is 1, and the constant term is 10. So you've got 10. Factors are 1, 2, 5, and 10. And you've got 1, which is just 1. So we divide each of these by 1. And our possible zeros are plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 5, plus or minus 10. And what we're going to do is we're going to test, make a guess as to which one of these numbers works. And we're going to do it using synthetic division. All right, so I'm going to attempt, and I'm going to say, let's test the number 2. And just to let you know, I'm pretty sure 2 is not one of them. So you don't have to do this part, but watch the video and listen. We're going to use synthetic division, which means multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, and add would be negative 12. So if you get, hopefully from the last lesson, you should remember this must be 0. So you should look at this and automatically know that positive 2 is not a choice. So if positive 2 is not a choice, or not a possible 0, you go ahead and you try another one. Well, let's try negative 2. There's a 1. Multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, and add. And since this is a remainder of 0, we know that negative 2 is one of our solutions. So we know that's one of our solutions. Now it's asking us to find all the possible zeros. So you've got now a 1x squared minus 6x plus 5. And since you have this part right here, you can then factor it. Factors of 5 that add up to negative 6. Which means then my zeros are negative 2, 5, and 1. Now, I'd like to, this is something you're going to have to do later on, but I'm going to go ahead and show you what the sketch of this graph would look like. If you were to graph this on your calculator and get a rough sketch, you would have something that came up like this. Come back down again like this. Go pretty far down there. And then go back up. All right? And if you notice something, these numbers, negative 2, 1, 5, all of them are the x-intercepts of the graph. So that tells us that when you are testing, use the graph to pick the test points. All right. So find all the real zeros of this. The first thing we need to do is find the possible zeros. So that would be 24 and 1. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, 24. And you're getting divided by 1. So we set up synthetic division. And we have to pick then one of these plus or minus zeros. So pause the video, graph it on your calculator, and we'll come up with some good choices. Well, hopefully you paused the video and graphed and saw that the graph looks like it might go through a positive 3. So let's test it. So you drop down the 1 and you multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply. You get 0. That's good. That means that 3 is a 0 for this graph. Now, you can go ahead and factor it if you want. You could say that you've got x squared plus 6x plus 8, and that the factored form is x minus x plus 4, x plus 2. But you don't have to. You could set this back up again. Look at some of the other possible zeros, such as -2 and -4, and try them out. Let's try -2 with synthetic division. Bring down the 1, multiply, add, multiply, get a 0. We now know that -2 for sure is a solution. And we went from an x cubed to an x squared, now to a 1x plus 4 equals 0, which means -4 is my last 0. So that's how that checkpoint works out. All right, we'll do the guided practices number 3 now. So we have to find all of the zeros for this function, for number 3. So we find the possible ones by looking at 18 over 1, which could be 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, 18, all divided by 1, and all, of course, having a plus or minus. So we then use synthetic division to try it out. And we look at our graph. We grab our calculator real quick, and we just want to get a sketch of it. It doesn't have to be perfect. And we put it into the calculator. And you graph it, and it looks like possible choices, our best guesses should be 1, positive 1, -3, and positive 6. So those are what we should try. Let's try the big one first. Let's try 6. 1, 6. Multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, get a 0. 6 works. It's a good one. So then we set up synthetic substitution or synthetic division. Let's try -3. Multiply, add, multiply, add. -3 for sure is one of our zeros. And lastly here, we went from, please remember this part, an x cubed to an x squared. So now we have 1x minus 1 equals 0. And what makes x minus 1 equal to 0? Of course, a positive 1. So we now know that these are our zeros. Let's do number 4. Oops. Number 4. We're supposed to find the zeros for x cubed minus 8x squared plus 5x plus 14. Well, we have 14 over, the factors of 14 and the factors of 1. So that's 1, 2, 7, 14. Divided by 1, and it's a plus or minus as always. So you set up synthetic division. You look at the graph to get a good guess. So why don't you pause the video and try to get the good guesses on your own. All right, you should have paused it, and you should look at the graph, and you should see that a negative 1, a positive 2, and positive 7 are the good choices. Now you have to test them. So make it negative 1, put the coefficients across the top, drop down the leading coefficient, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, add. You get a remainder of 0. Therefore, this negative 1 works as a solution. Now from here, set up synthetic division again. This time, let's use the big number 7. Drop down the 1, multiply, add, multiply, add. Remainder of 0. That tells us that 7 for sure is a possibility. And we went from, like we've been doing, an x cubed to an x squared, now to 1x minus 2 equals 0. So my last 0 ends up being a 2. All right, let's see. Now it's a 4th power. All right. So list all the possibilities. This time it's a little bit more because when you have the 3 and the 8, well, the factors of 3 are 1, 3. But they have to be divided by the factors of 1, 2, 4, so you have all of those. And please do not forget the plus or minus. So our choices are plus or minus 1, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 1/2, plus or minus 3/2, and then there's a plus or minus 3/8 in there as well. Now, you're going to graph this, so pause the video and graph this to come up with reasonable ones. Okay, so when it says to use your function's graph, you're really going to need to maybe estimate. What I mean by that is when you graph this, there are not any whole number zeros. Okay, 1 doesn't work, 3 doesn't work, but some of these fractions very well might. So you have to get an idea of which one's which. So some of them won't be very nice. Basically, what you should see, if you can zoom in a little bit, is you'll see some lines. It crosses 4 times, and it looks like it comes through here, back up through here, very close through there, and then again between 1 and 2. Okay? So your graph should look something like that. All right. And what you got to do, these numbers here, we have to find some values that are close to those. So we know that 1 isn't anywhere close. We know 3, it's not anywhere close. We look at 1/2, and positive and negative 1/2. If you look here, that and that could be plus or minus 1/2. It's possible. 3/2. Well, if you look here and here, plus or minus 3/2 is also something that could work. This number right here could be 1/4. So positive 1/4 might need to be checked. Maybe negative 3/4. Maybe negative 3/4. And, maybe even 1/8. These are some of the possibilities. And so you need to try to guess which one for sure. All right, so these are the reasonable values for the zeros. And thankfully, they tell us which one to try. Says to try negative 3/2. Well, and this is where, synthetic division, synthetic substitution, you're going to may need to have your calculator. Because when you do negative 3/2 times 8, it's negative 12. Adding, you should be able to do negative 10. Then negative 3/2 times 10 is negative 15. Oh, I'm sorry, this should be positive 15 because negative times a negative. When you're adding now, it should be negative 6, which gives me 9, which is 2, negative 3, 0. So we know that negative 3/2 is a 0. Is a 0. All right. So now we know that we have, right, as a product of factors and factor out. All right, so we went from an x to the 4th. We're now at an x cubed. So what I've got is I have x plus 3/2, and we have 8x cubed minus 10x squared minus 6x plus 2. All right. And I'm not sure about the rest of these directions. I would personally look at the 8, negative 10, negative 6, and 2, and see if synthetic division will help you get it to a quadratic. So we know that negative 1/2 was a solution. And let's look at some of these others. I'm not sure what the answers are, so we're going to give it a try. Let's try negative 3/4. Drop down the 8, multiply, add, multiply, let's see here, 12, then 6. .5, not going to give us 0. So negative 3/4 does not work. So thankfully I can erase easily. You should just go ahead and rewrite. So what was that? Negative 3/4 is not a solution. So let's try negative 1/2. All right, let's see if negative 1/2 is a solution. Drop down the 8. Half of 8 is negative 4. negative 14. Half of 14 is 7, gives us a 1. A 1/2, and does not work. So negative 1/2 does not work. All right. So now we have to figure out a little bit more. So that one didn't work. All right, let's give 1/4 a try. We're going to jump to the other side and see. At one of these points, hopefully, will work. 1/4 of 8 is 2. That gives me negative 8. 1/4 of 8 is negative 2. Negative 8. 1/4 of negative 8 is negative 2 and gives me 0. That makes me very, very happy. Okay, whenever I see that 0 in there, I get happy. So now I have that 1/4 is also a 0. And now I have the equation 8x squared minus 8x minus 8. And I can do this a bunch of ways as well. So let's put in here, I guess, factor out an 8. I'm not sure how you want to fill this out. But we're going to repeat. We repeated the steps to basically figure out that the zeros, so far, find the remaining zeros. We have the zeros of 1/4, of negative 3/2, and it gives us the equation 8x squared minus 8x minus 8. And so now I have to set this equal to 0 and try to solve. And we will go with this. Look for monomials first. And now you should see there's no way this is factorable. We have to use either completing the square or the quadratic formula. And we do quadratic formula. Let's do an example of it. A equals B equals C equals 1, negative 1, negative 1. So we have x equals opposite b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I plugged in A, B, and C. And when I work it out now, we have 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 plus 4 over 2, which is 1 plus or minus the square root of 5 over 2. Those are your answers. That's how you set this up. All right? So let's try out guided practice number 5. You have 48x cubed plus 4x squared minus 20x plus 3. All right, so pause the video and set up all the possible zeros. All right, so these are all the possible zeros. You can see that there are tons of them. They are the factors of the constant 3. So we have 1 and 3. And you're dividing by all the different possible factors of 48. And there's tons of them. So now we have to graph it to see what it looks like. So why don't you pause the video, get an idea of what the graph looks like, and try to come up with the ones you think could be the solutions. All right, so this graph is pretty horrible, but we know it's something close to 1, close to 0, or negative 1, close to 0, and maybe close to 1/2. So basically we can get rid of we know it's definitely not more than 1, or even 1. And let's just get some good guesses here. Good guesses for this might be 3/4. Negative 3/4 would be a good guess. Looking at this side right here, probably 1/4 would be a good guess. Could even be 1/6, maybe even 1/8, but definitely not any of these other ones. These ones are way too close to 0. So let's go ahead and give some of these a try first. So I'm going to delete my graph from here. I'm going to set up synthetic division. 48, 4, -20, and 3. And let's try the 1/4 first. Let's just see what happens. Drop down the 48. A fourth of 48 is 12. Add. A fourth of 16 is 4. Add. A fourth of 16 is -4. Gives me -1. 1/4 is not a 0. So let's try 1/6. Let's try 1/6. So a sixth of 48, I think, is 8. Gives me 12. That gives me a sixth of 12 is 2. That's -18. A sixth of -18 is -3. Gives me 0. And a 0 makes me happy. So I now have one of my zeros. 1/6 is a 0 for sure. All right. We could go ahead and try another one. Let's try -3/4 and see if that gets us anywhere. It's 48. 3/4 of 48 is 36. Add is again 48. So we know it's, oh, I'm sorry, we're not adding. It's -36. So that means 24. And then 3/4 of 24 is 18. Gives me 0. And again, a smiley face. So I now know that -3/4 is one of my zeros. And what's great about this is once I went from a x cubed to an x squared, now that I have 48x minus 24 equals 0, I add 24 to both sides. 48x equals 24. I divide by 48, and I get that my last x value is 1/2. So up here, I can write 1/2, and these are now all my zeros. All right, I think we were going to do guided practice number 6 as well. Basically, I think I'm doing most of the guided practices for you today. So number 6, we have to find all of the zeros for 2x to the 4th plus 5x cubed minus 18x squared minus 19x plus 42. So again, you should pause the video, come up with all the possible zeros. So you have all these possibles, right? This is over 1. And don't forget the plus or minus. So these are all the possible zeros. They're important to write down all the possible zeros so that when you graph it, you can come up with good choices. So please go ahead and try to pause the video and graph this on your own. And you should have a graph. Yours won't look like this, but it should look like it's going through somewhere right here, close to -4. It looks like it goes right through -2. This might be 1.5. This might be something else. So the good ones to try for, we're going to write some of the ones here. Let's say that we're going to attempt to do, for sure, -2. Let's see, you're close to 4, but not actually 4. That would be, actually, I don't see any on there that are close to 4. Here's 1/2, so we're going to try +1/2. And we're going to try this one, which looks, oh, not 1/2, 1.5. So 3/2 is right here. And maybe you want to try something close to 1. I actually don't see anything. So let's try these. Let's start by attempting to do synthetic division with 2, 5, -18, -19, and 42. So let's do -2 first. Let's use the whole number. Drop down the 2, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply. It's -9, that's 18. Does not give us 0. All right. I saw a mistake here. I didn't know why. I could have sworn this would work, and this is why. It's not 10. -2 times -20, everyone should have stopped me, is 40. Which when you do this, it becomes 21, -42, and 0, smiley face. So I now have a 2x, went from an x to the 4th to an x cubed. And I know one of the zeros. So let's continue. Let's try the next one. 3/2. So bring down the 2. That's 3. Add. That's 6. Add. And then 14. That's -21 and 0. Happy face. So what we did was we right away found our zeros by graphing and made sure they were zeros by synthetic division. And now have 2x squared plus 4x minus 14. And from here, you look to see if it's factorable, which unfortunately it's not. So then we have to go back and use the quadratic formula. X equals opposite b. So x equals opposite b is -2. Plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And I know some simplifying, -2 plus or minus. See, that's 4 plus 28. That's -2 plus or minus 32 over 2, which will give you the correct answer. Now, of course, if you were to check, 32 is 4 times 8, and 4 is 2 times 2, 8 is 2 times 2 times 2. Looking for pairs, here's a pair, here's a pair. So all together, we have -2 plus or minus 4 square root 2 over 2, which again is a correct answer. But -2, 4, and 2 can become -1 plus or minus 2 square root 2. This is the best answer. You will have gotten the credit from way up here somewhere. But these are the last two zeros. Okay? Last two zeros. All right. So, to keep this short, I want you to do number 2 of checkpoint on your own. Try to find all the zeros. Rewatch the video. See if it can help you. This one right here, the story problem. You're given a volume. You're told what the base is. And now you have an equation. 16 equals this. When you multiply x plus 3 that's x plus 3 times x plus 3, which gives us x squared plus 6x plus 9. And you're multiplying this then by x, which gives us x cubed plus 6x plus 9x. And when you subtract 16 from both sides, you get 0. So you now have to factor completely an x cubed plus 6x squared plus 9x minus 16. So you should be able to solve the rest of that. All right, so I did most of your guided practice. Do this checkpoint here. This is what we'll work on in class. Good luck.